I had to censor my mic. Kia guys, welcome to the Wholesome Half Hour, episode 2 for this week. Today I've got Penelope joining me at the side, and we're going to talk a little bit about the economy and the economics of COVID-19. It's kind of the hot topic. It's something that comes up every time people start talking about COVID-19. Talk about economy, we talk about jobs, unemployment, all of that stuff. So we're going to kind of walk you through, I guess, the basics today and talk a little bit more about that, and I guess try to make sense of it all and connect it a little bit more to how it might affect your life, being a New Zealand high schooler. But first, this is Penelope. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Cool. So a lot of you guys may remember me from some of the exam breakdown videos where I did a bit of physics, a bit of chemistry, a little bit of stats in there too. But in reality, my degree is economics, and I should have a degree in the next couple of months if I pass my last couple of papers. Economics really is exactly what I want to do with my life. It is the thing I'm most passionate about. And I guess, like, to start us off, I actually would love to discuss what economics actually is and
totally.
sort of like that it actually covers.
You're doing my job for me. Don't even have to ask the questions.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. No, I could just talk all day, especially about economics, that's for sure.
So what is economics?
Here's the question. Economics was originally born from philosophy, and I think you can really break it down to be more or less about the sum of all of our actions as individuals within a society. So it's more or less like I decide to go buy this coffee, I then go to work and I earn some money by doing something for society, whether that's I'm a doctor and I'm there to look after patients, or it's I'm a policeman keeping law and order, or something along those lines. And when you aggregate all of those actions together and the way that we interact as individuals within a society, you create an economy and something that operates and money gets shuffled around. And when you hear economics, you more or less talk about money. And while money is relevant, it's more or less a way that we measure economics rather than the actual substance of economics itself.
Why is money so? What, I guess this is kind of like a dumb question, but I'll ask it anyway. Like, why is economics just not just about money?
Well, I guess, especially the way that we measure economics at the moment with GDP, we do measure it in terms of a dollar value, but that's just a reflection on what's actually happening within the economy, how many transactions we're having on a day-to-day basis. And economics is a tool that we can use to understand society, to understand if we do this, how is that going to have an impact on that? And it can actually model things like environmental implications, and it can other things that, while that isn't about money necessarily, money is just the tool and the measurement that we use to look at those issues. Yeah,
no, totally. I agree with your explanation. No, that's awesome. And I guess so. Then the question becomes, why is the economy such a hot topic because of COVID-19? Like, obviously, like, it's a health crisis. On the first part, but what makes it like an economic crisis as well?
Well, I guess the word everybody's hearing at the moment is recession, and that's something we cannot take lightly. It is quite a strong word, and we're not quite there yet, because the definition of a recession is where the economy goes backwards for a period of 6 months. Now, we're not quite at that 6-month mark yet, but the way that it's looking is looking like we are going to be going backwards for that period of time. This health crisis in particular has caused a shock to our everyday lives. It has been a shock to the economy because of the fact that, we're a part of the economy. Our everyday lives have been impacted. And this shock has been quite unique because it's affected our supply line, so how we're producing our goods and services within an economy, but also it's affected our demand. So whether I'm not actually going to go out and buy a coffee, not because I don't demand one, it's because I can't actually physically get out and buy a coffee. And so there was the combination of the supply chains being interrupted and the demand of all individuals within society being set back. So we're not going out and actually giving money into the economy, but we can't buy some of the things that we want to buy because they're just not there. And so when you factor that all in, you quickly realize that money is just not being spent in the same way that it was. And it's going to be a very long time until all of us as individuals are spending money in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the effects one transaction has, the knock-on effects are big. So if we look at the small scale, your coffee example, if I don't go and buy a coffee from my local cafe, and let's say only half the people who usually go to get coffee go now. It's level 3, so some people still go, but then so that cafe can't afford to pay its staff, and then they can't afford to pay their suppliers. So the people who supply them with their coffee beans and their flour. Let's just stick with the coffee beans, and then the coffee roaster can't afford to pay their supplier from overseas who grows the coffee, and and there's less people involved in moving those coffee beans around, the couriers who have to take it from the roastery to the cafe, and very quickly just one industry having to scale back has an effect on a wide range of industries straight away. Just that cafe example, what we came up with, coffee roasters and couriers and maybe supermarkets as well, if and that's just one small industry. If you look at something like construction, there's so many people and parts involved with that, right? You've got the people who are laboring on the site. You've got the people who are designing the buildings. You've got people who want to rent this building out when it's finished. You've got people supplying the timber. You've got people making the timber. The effects of what might seem like a small thing at first are really large.
Yeah, absolutely. You quickly realize in times like this just how intertwined we all are and how dependent we are on the current way that we're living our lives. And when things get shocked like this, and our daily lives are so interrupted and become entirely different, the way that we were working in the economy originally just gone. It's just gone. And so, especially with COVID and how when we come out of this, life still isn't going to be the same. It's still going to be different. And again, all these interactions that we're having and how intertwined they are, it's going to take a long time to get back to exactly how many couriers we had, exactly how many coffee beans we were roasting on a daily basis to provide us with our caffeine needs. It's definitely an interesting one.
Yeah. So I guess the next question becomes, obviously we've seen the New Zealand government in particular has taken a very well-considered and very proactive approach in tackling coronavirus from a health perspective. What has the government been doing here from an economic perspective to mitigate the fact that, some people might not be able to work while we were in lockdown, some people might still not be able to work now we're on level 3? What's the government doing about that?
Well, I guess the government sort of has two streams in which it can act, and it's definitely acted in one of them quite strongly and evidently, and that's increasing the government spending. So you all have heard various bits and bobs about this package that they introduced, the $12.1 billion package back in, I want to say, late March.
Sounds about right.
And that included things like the wage subsidy, increasing beneficiaries' payment by $25, and supporting the health industry, those sorts of payments that they were making. And the aim of increasing government spending is, and there's quite a few different reasons. If they're supplying it to businesses, it's about supporting those businesses to stay in operation, and also to support keeping their staff on board, because of course, as we know, if you let staff go, their income will decrease and they just still won't spend as much, and that's going to further slow the economy down. So making sure that we can keep people employed and also businesses just to survive the next few months, that's exactly what they need to do. But there's sort of another level to that, in that when they're investing into new industries, like maybe you would have noticed on the news, I think it was last night or the night before, something about increasing the payment towards Transmission Gully and increasing the expenditure on roads. And you would have seen that the different regions were bidding to have their roads or infrastructure projects in their region, and that's designed so that you're going to be creating more jobs, and specifically the construction industry, like you were talking about before. And that's more or less sort of like why the government's increasing their spending. You can look at the individual examples and you can trace exactly the incentives behind it, why they're doing what they're doing. But if we start to look more and more into exactly what they're doing and why they're doing, that's where it can start to get a little bit political. So we'll probably avoid that one. Because of course there's two sides to that coin. But then there's this whole other stream that the government can go down to react to this looming recession, and that's tax cuts. And that could be income taxes, so what is taken off your wages on a weekly basis, business tax, what the businesses are earning, they obviously have to pay some tax on that, and even GST, so that's your goods and services tax, so that's the 15% tax on top of the loaf of bread that you buy in the morning and the coffee, whatever it is that you're buying. And the idea behind all of those, again, individually have different incentives. Individual tax, we cut that. We have more income to go out and spend. I can buy some, you were talking about before the difference if we were to cut the tax from 20% to 10%, that's on $100, that's an extra $10, which is an additional 2 coffees. If you were to look at it that way. So you can just see how a change in the tax rate can incentivize you to go out and spend more. Reduction in business taxes, businesses will have less pressure to let go of their staff, but it also just frees up a little bit more spending money, which could help them actually restructure their business to fit this changing new economy. And GST, of course, makes things a little bit cheaper for us to buy.
Yeah, and I guess probably another example you could look at is, say, if we look at income tax, obviously, if they reduced income tax, you would have more money in your pocket at the end of the week after your employer paid you. You might not, especially under a PAYE system, which is the system that automatically takes your taxes before it comes into your bank account. You might not fully realize how much you pay in taxes, but say you were working say your salary is $55,000, which is around the average. In a week, your pay that you get take home is around $800, and the rest, about $200 of that is gone as tax. $183 is gone as tax. So imagine if you got, say, half of that back. That's an extra $90. That's a lot of money. You can do a lot of things with an extra $90 a week. You could get, how many coffees could you get? That's 20 coffees?
Yeah, something like that. Yep, that would sound about right.
10 if they're from Starbucks.
Yeah, maybe some KFC.
Yeah, no, totally. So I guess the government has a lot of options in their tool belt. We've seen some of them already. The wage subsidies, I guess, kind of the biggest and most prevalent example, which essentially is paying a good proportion of the wages in New Zealand at the moment. And that was the current government probably saw that as a way of, they saw it as a way of getting money to Kiwi businesses and Kiwi employees very quickly. We'll hear more in the budget, which comes out on May 14, I believe. Next Thursday, I think, is the day. But I guess moving along, what is the role of the Reserve Bank in all of this? We hear about them from time to time. Hear about, I've forgotten his name now, but the Reserve Bank governor, he shows up from time to time, talks about the official cash rate and some basis points and some other random numbers. What's all of that about?
It's a good question. This is definitely not my specialty area, understanding sort of the financial system and financial stability, but understanding the role of the Reserve Bank is more or less to maintain stability in the price level. So that is just financial stability within New Zealand. So making sure that prices don't hyperinflate and head off towards $20 for a coffee, trying to keep them around that $5 mark, or in specifics they target a 2%-ish increase in prices on a year-to-year basis. And so they have tools in achieving that goal, which is what you will have heard about more, because that's more or less what we care about, which are things like interest rates. So you would have, of course, heard interest rates have decreased. quite significantly. I think it was 1% before.
So it was 1% at the beginning of the year since like some point last year, and now it's 0.25% is the official cash rate. And that's the rate that the Reserve Bank loans money to the other banks. So the Reserve Bank loans money to like your Westpac, your ASB, etc. at that interest rate. So that's gone down by 0.75%, almost a percent.
Yeah. So it's it was quite a big drop, but of course maybe it was needed. The idea behind that is you decrease the interest rate, you're making it easier to borrow money and cheaper. So say we are getting out $100. Before we would have had to pay $1 a year on that loan. Now we only have to pay 25 cents. Is that right? Yeah. Which is quite a lot less.
Yeah, totally. And I guess the other way this works to a lesser extent is some people may have noticed this. If you keep an eye on your savings account, your interest rate in the last few months would have gone down heaps. I think most of the New Zealand banks now, bonus interest rates are around 0.65%, which is very little. And say I was sitting on cash, say, I don't know, I'm 40, I've saved a lot of money, I've got my $100,000 sitting in my bank account. Say I was earning 4% on that. Every year I'd be getting $4,000 just for doing nothing and sitting on that cash. But now I'm getting $650 instead of $4,000 on $100,000, which is not a great return at all. And I might be incentivized to, instead of just holding that money, I might be oh, stuff it, I'm going to go buy a house or buy some coffee and do something more productive with that money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and also you've got the low interest rates, therefore the lower mortgage rates potentially. So it may be cheaper to buy a house right now. Yeah. Maybe.
If you've got your deposit lined up, now's the time. You can get in.
A big if. I guess more or less the main concept behind it is if it's cheaper to borrow money, you're going to borrow money and spend it. And so that's going to incentivize you to start spending some more, which of course ties right back into the fact that that's the issue that we're having right now, is that we need to encourage people to spend money to speed up and encourage this economy to get moving, which is why this is the Reserve Bank's tool to do just that.
Yeah. And I guess the other question is, so obviously the borders are closed at the moment. What beyond people not being what's the problem from an economic perspective of people not being able to come into the country as they usually would?
Well, I mean that the obvious answer is the tourism industry, and how that obviously is a huge part of New Zealand, and how we bring money in, and also just think about one person coming in, doesn't matter where they're coming from, but they're coming for a 2-week holiday. They come in, they obviously pay some airport fees, pay for their Uber to get to where they're going, pay for all the hotels while they're there, the food while they're there, the activities that they're doing. And if you sort of add up how much money they're spending, we're not getting that anymore. But not only are we as a country not getting that, the businesses are no longer getting that. So think about Queenstown in particular, who has been quite hard hit by all of this. Especially going into a winter season and all the skiers that would have come to Queenstown. We're going to be relying on all of our domestic individuals to go to Queenstown to go skiing, or maybe
if the government eases domestic travel restrictions, this might be the cheapest opportunity you get in your life to go to Queenstown.
Yeah, absolutely, and it would be really great for the economy, because the businesses down there, they aren't getting any revenue at the moment. And when they aren't getting revenue, of course, they're having to cut their costs to survive as a business. And this is where we lead into a bit of a spiral, especially in the tourism industry, and how it relates to other industries is the people that they let go, therefore don't have the same income that they had beforehand. They're having to go elsewhere, find other accommodation. They're also, not spending in the same habits that they used to. And so then that's bleeding through to affect all the other industries that are no longer getting that income, which then in turn those other industries, like your coffee, they're not getting their income, they're having to cut costs, they let go of their staff, and suddenly that leads to this rapid spiral affecting all of our industries, not just the tourism industry. And like we were talking about at the start, how everything's so intertwined, this is just another example of how one industry can really impact another industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I guess the other thing that you see a little bit is you're seeing, we probably haven't completely seen it yet, but you can anticipate some reduction in international trade. Say, for example, in the US right now, a lot of their states are heavily shut down. Anyone who is shipping stuff to the US for businesses to sell there, they might be having a hard time getting any of that stuff sold. So any industries that rely on exporting their products that they make in New Zealand elsewhere, if the countries that usually import them are not in a position to, or they can only import half of what they usually would, that's going to have some effects on the situation in New Zealand as well for those businesses.
Yeah, well, I mean, it already has quite significantly as well. If you think about the fact that New Zealand's main exporters are like food, so like your dairy products, your beef, your lamb, all of that. And the thing about those is that they need refrigerators and fast travel to get to the country that they need to be sold.
Can't warehouse your cow for
you can't
6 months.
You can't pack your cow on a ship and send it off and then slaughter it on the other end. It's part of the whole New Zealand brand is that we're doing it here. We're shipping the meat to you, rice fresh, ready to go.
Yeah.
And if to ship things fast, we rely on air travel, which just isn't happening at the same level anymore. And before this all happened, we were using passenger planes to export all of our goods underneath. And of course, the cost of that transport was subsidized by the passengers, which of course is not happening anymore. So the cost of transporting these what are they called, food, so dairy, beef, lamb, all of that side of things, has increased quite significantly. And so on the other end, that only increases the price of goods that we're trying to sell, which makes it a little bit more challenging to compete with their domestic markets. So it does have a massive impact on our international trade, not being able to have those passenger planes flying. We're really trying at the moment, I imagine, to keep trade going at the same level with all countries, because they of course want to keep their economy going as well. But it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen in the upcoming months in that space as well.
Yeah, China is one of the big trading partners for New Zealand, so it will be interesting to see how that goes. Though they, without talking too soon, their recovery seems a little faster than some of the other countries around the globe. Going on to our last slide here, you have a little bit about opportunities that exist and also the market economy versus the state economy.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll try to talk through this without getting political in any way, shape, or form. But
you should vote in September if you're 18.
Yeah. I was actually watching something by Jacinda today about how climate change is not political, it's just being on the right side of history. And I think that quote sort of ties nicely into what opportunities exist here, in that when we're rebuilding our economy and reshaping our businesses to fit whatever it looks like in the near future, we can think about how we can do that in a sustainable way. And we as consumers, when we start to buy things again, thinking very carefully about where that's come from and what industries we're supporting, because that's what's going to grow and flourish. And if we think very carefully about, we're going to buy this because it's, net carbon neutral, or this is sustainable, this has got no plastic, then that's setting our economy up to be sustainable for a long term. Of course, if we don't, we will have another crisis to deal with in a few years' time, i.e. climate change. So that's definitely something that I think we need to be
without going on a full tangent, it is interesting to see the current government has, how do I phrase this in a very new... The current government made some promises about moving agriculture into the emissions trading scheme, which haven't been fully realised at this point, which is an interesting, given the prevalence they give to, or Jacinda especially gives to climate change and in their marketing. It'll be interesting to see. The government is doing a lot of... They're making a big effort, as all governments do, to move through as much stuff as possible. Like, as the election gets closer, governments really put the foot on the gas, and especially in New Zealand, you can pass stuff quickly. This is completely off topic. Did you see the thing last week where they passed the wrong bill?
No.
There was like a mix. You could search this up. There was a mix up in the parliamentary councillor's office, and like they passed the wrong version of a bill, and it was like missing like a section that was meant to be there. Yeah, there's your fun aside for the day. Anyway, going back on topic, what's the market economy and what's the state economy?
Well, I guess to put it simply, a market economy is where there is no government intervention whatsoever. We're just out there living our best lives. Nobody's telling us what to do, but there's market forces driving us towards doing certain things. So, that's where your supply demand comes in. If there's a lot of demand for a product, the suppliers are going to put up the prices because you're going to buy it anyway. That side of things. Whereas a state economy is the polar opposite, where the government has almost full control. And of course, those are two ends of a spectrum, and we're never ever going to be at either end, and neither end looks particularly appealing in any way, shape, or form to anybody in New Zealand, perhaps. But we as a country sit somewhere in the middle, and we tend to fluctuate over time. And those fluctuations caused by a lot of factors. Who's in government is one of them, but also just like what's happening with the change of times and all of that side of things as well.
Yeah, and I guess an example of that is, so like in New Zealand, if you go to buy, I don't know how much it is now, but if you go to buy like a packet of cigarettes, it's like outrageously expensive. It's like $30 or something. If the tobacco companies like had it their way, they're like, oh, we can sell these for $10. Like heaps of people buy cigarettes, and that's great. But the government's decided that from a public health perspective, that's not something we want. So the government has put a tax on cigarettes and artificially increase the price of cigarettes. I guess another example you could look at is, so in New Zealand, like there's no tax on like soft drinks, but some people think that sugar's bad. Sugar has negative health outcomes as well, so we should tax that as well. So that kind of gives you an example of where the government could do something, but they haven't in the case of soda or like sugary drinks, but they have in the case of tobacco. And governments can do all sorts of things like that to play with prices and play with the supply and demand of things in a market.
Yeah, absolutely. And your example of tobacco specifically is a perfect example of a market failure, in that if you left it as a full market economy, those market forces will feed on your addiction, and that will ultimately control it. But the reason I put this in now into this sort of discussion about COVID is because of a state of crisis. If we were to leave it to the markets to sort out, it just seems it's risky. Whether it would have happened or not, I don't know. It just seems incredibly risky to leave it up to everybody to organise amongst themselves, the markets to sort it out, for us to, self-isolate, self-distance, social distance, or whatever would have happened. So the government stepped in and decided that they're going to take control in this situation and try and flatten the curve. Because their prediction, of course, if they didn't come in, would be that the curve would have gone hard and fast, up, 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 up. There would have been a lot of deaths. It would have been a strain on the healthcare system, and then it would have gone back down, and then the markets would have picked back up eventually, but it would have cost a lot of lives. Which is another example of a market failure. And I guess, So I guess
you're
like
entirely right. Yeah. Keep going.
Yeah. So I guess in this scenario, it's more or less about asking the question: should the government intervene, and why they should intervene, and maybe even how. And I think the answer to those questions can be incredibly subjective. And depending on your political views, you may believe that the government should intervene or it shouldn't. And that's whether they should is more towards state economy, if they shouldn't, more towards market economy. And that's why the debating between the two is perfect. That's what we need. It's the democracy after all. But in the state of COVID, my opinion would have been that the government did the right thing by intervening. Yeah. I don't know if that's an opinion. I feel like it may be, but that is more or less. I feel
like in New Zealand that is not an unpopular opinion, but who knows? No, I think that's great. I think that's a pretty good spread of topics. Was there anything? Did you have any closing thoughts you wanted to say?
No, I guess. Well, in summary, I would say, like we talk about economics in school and whatnot, and it goes over their heads. But economics it covers quite a large span of topics, and it's a way of thinking. It's a way of understanding issues and tracking them back to their cause. And I think the way that we covered through all these different types of economics, there's obviously heaps more. Game theory, microeconomics, good to go. I'm here to talk about all of those, but these ones nicely explain exactly what the economy is going through right now with COVID-19.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us, Penelope. Thanks so much for joining us, team. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below, and Penelope or someone will jump in there and try to answer them for you as well. And if we have heaps of them, we might pick it up on a different episode. But thanks for watching. Have an awesome rest of your week. And we'll see you next time. Bye.